right, welcome back, guys. This is another installment, obviously, of PPK Perspectives, and I didn't really mention this in the first episode that we did this, but my goal really with this segment is to be bringing on some younger people that I've been inspired by, people that I think should be heard by, especially the younger audience, people that I wish were kind of prevalent growing up for me as a Catholic. So I'm very excited to be joined by Nathan Crankfield. He has one of my favorite Catholic accounts on Instagram, and he's also the founder of Seeking Excellence. What's up, Nathan? How's it going?
What's good, homie? I appreciate that. I think several people's one of their favorite accounts and many people's least favorite accounts. So it's good to hear the positive feedback as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, I know I'm not big enough just yet to be someone's least favorite account, but I'm looking forward to that day.
It's fun. You'll see that in the podcast game as well. I think I checked the other day to see where like our reviews numbers, and I had seen that our 1-star reviews had increased as well. So
wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think maybe on Apple Podcasts we have one-star review. I remember when we got our first dislike on YouTube. I thought that was sick. I was like, here we go. Now we're starting to actually get out there.
That's when you're in the good stuff, man.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. So for obviously those of other viewers that don't know you, you want to give us a little synopsis of kind of yourself, maybe a little bit about your journey and all that?
Sure, absolutely. So born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and was baptized Lutheran. My dad was pretty much a non-practicing Baptist, and then I went to Methodist preschool, kindergarten, and started Catholic school. And so when I was 13, I became the first Catholic in my family. 4 years later, it was my mom's confirmation sponsor, which was a highlight for sure. And then I went to Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland, which I absolutely loved. I did Army ROTC there, and then before graduating, was commissioned an infantry officer in the Army. I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia for a year. I had already completed airborne school, and in Georgia the second time around, I did my infantry training and then Ranger school. Graduated from Ranger school in June of 2016. And then I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina for 3 years. In the middle of those 3 years, deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months. Got back from Afghanistan, was like, all right, I think I've had my fill of this Army stuff. I had kind of done most of the things I wanted to do. And so then I went to Dynamic Catholic. And so in 2019, got out of the Army, worked at Dynamic Catholic for a year as a parish consultant. I had the Diocese of Austin and Kansas City. It was absolutely incredible. Loved it. And then moved to Benedictine for 8 months, served as a resident director there for a short stint. Mainly moved there to date Emily, who I'm marrying in 2 weeks from the day of recording. And then I started with Hallow this past July. And so I've been working with Hallow for coming up on 8 months, I think, or just over 8 months. And then in the midst of all that, I started Seeking Excellence podcast and writing and things like that. And so I love to podcast. This is one of my favorite things to do. So it's great to be here with you, man. Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. Dang, that was a lot. Thank you for your service, first of all. I did not even realize you did all that, which is, you're way cooler than anything I've done. That's for sure.
Hey, you're still young.
Yeah, that's true. I am still young. That's cool. How is actually? I didn't plan on asking this, but how is Hallow? Because I tried applying there, but I didn't get any luck.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's great. I often tell people I think it's the best Catholic company in the world. Like from compensation to obviously mission and just the purpose-driven work that we get to do. The company culture is great. I get to work from home here in Denver. The company's based out of Chicago. I don't really have to travel too often, and they're very flexible if you want to travel or if you don't. My other major perk is that my second groomsman in my wedding is my boss. And so we grew up. He actually went to the same church growing up as Christian Duke, I'm pretty sure.
Holy name. Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, we went to high school together. And so that's super fun as well.
Man, that's sick.
Yeah, I love it. It's sick. 5 stars, man. Yeah,
well, you know what? I'm gonna keep applying, and one day
you should.
Maybe we'll be coworkers.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we had. I mean, I know for one of our positions on our team, we had like 240 applicants. So
Yeah, I
I'm
bet.
forever reminded how lucky I am, how
Dude,
blessed I am.
I thought that Franciscan degree would just get me anywhere in life, but it's not true, I guess.
We do have a Franciscan grad on the sales team, but she's a few years out of college and had some sales experience and stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's a thing too. I'm a youngin.
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, okay. Before we get into some of the deep questions, I like to kind of break the ice a little bit. And I just came
Sure.
off of me and my wife watched the Batman last night, and dude, I'm so hyped up about it. But I want to hear at least okay. You got 3 movies that you can watch for the rest of your life, but it's only those 3. What are you choosing?
Wow. So I think one of the keys here is picking different genres. So I would go. I think the debatably the best comedy movie ever is Step Brothers. Especially if you're grading for watchability and like repeated watchability.
Oh yeah, of course.
So I'd say Step Brothers would be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd probably go with like a really good drama of some sort, which would probably be like The Departed or Man on Fire or like Training Day. I'm a big Denzel guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say last, I would need one that's like inspiring. And my favorite inspiring movie, if I really want to get after it, is Creed. I'm a huge Rocky, the whole Rocky series. I love them all.
Wow.
Obviously, Rocky 5 is the worst one, but the Creeds were my favorite. The combination of like modern day Philly culture, which is what Harrisburg was like, Rocky, rap music. I mean, it was such a dope combo. So
That's interesting, dude. That's really interesting. I wouldn't think about Creed like that. I liked Creed a lot. I'm just not like a big Michael B. Jordan fan, but I think he does well for that. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I think he was good in Just Mercy as well. I'm not a massive fan of him as an individual. Which
It's hard
which is
to
true
be,
for most people in Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
You got like
Yeah,
Chris
exactly.
Pratt
Yeah.
and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Like
exactly.
and Denzel. Denzel's pretty non-woke.
Yeah. He's
He
solid.
doesn't speak out much, but he is pretty non-woke when they do push him on things like race and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I've seen a few of those videos. I like the Step Brothers has got to be a top 5 comedy. I think no matter how you put it. For me, it's probably The Other Guys.
Sure.
If I'm choosing a comedy, that's got to
Really?
be mine. Yeah, I got it, dude. It's just too good.
That's crazy to me.
Really? You don't like it?
I mean, I like it, but I would call it like a C plus. I think it's
Wow.
Will Ferrell alone. I don't think it makes his top 5. So
That's crazy.
a poll
Yeah,
on the other guy.
that's a wild. I got that. My drama is Good Will Hunting,
that's
probably, and then
Also combination of inspiring and drama with Good Will Hunting.
No,
know?
definitely. That one hits, dude, every time. Like it's like I've seen it like 4 times, and I still cry at that one scene every time.
Yeah.
But that, and then it's like literally just throw in any of the. You could throw in this Batman or the last 3 Batmans, and it's like I'm not even a
that's a
comic
good
book guy.
point.
I just love Batman though. Like any of those,
Dark
you can
Knight.
do Dark Knight Rises, or this last one was insane, dude. But okay, yeah, enough of them. This is not a movie channel, unfortunately. Maybe one day we'll get there. But I think today we're gonna talk about a few different things. We have, I think, at least a similar journey of sort of like this weird, I don't know, transition of like both politics and faith, and kind of that was a big thing for me in high school, was really starting to like feel like I was challenged. And like one of the things I always say is I told you I went to a public school. I went to public school my whole life besides Franciscan.
Yeah.
And in my AP government class, our teacher actually had to sit by political affiliation, which is pretty wild to do in the public school for sure.
Wow.
And it's generally, AP is generally what you would consider probably upper middle class people for the most part. And we had 4 people in my row, which was essentially just conservatives, and then about 26, 28 people in the other rows. So that's when I like really started to put together like, wow, okay, like I got to really educate myself on some things. And
I'm in the minority.
yeah, seriously, like big time.
That's crazy.
And so that was wild. But anyways, one of the things I thought would be great for us to talk about, obviously, is diversity. And I think it could be an interesting subject. And I feel like because most I guess prominent Catholic speakers don't tend to be minority. Maybe it feels like a weird thing to talk about, but because you know, well, I'm not prominent, but I'm a minority, so maybe I can have a little dose of
And
something.
you're Catholic.
But yeah, and I'm Catholic as well. So I was
You're two
thinking,
out
you know
of the
what?
three.
Yeah, exactly. I got 2 out of the 3. So maybe something's worth going on here. But I think for starters, like, let's define what we think actual diversity means, right? So like, I think, you know, words have meaning, and we can't just throw around things and use this sort of, you know, trigger words that maybe the society wants us to. So like, what would you define as actual diversity?
That's a great question, and I've never thought about this before, and I'm not going to cheat and Google it real quick. But what I would say, I think of when I think of the word diversity, or what I think it would be defined as, because there is a definition of it, right? And I'm not trying to just give my own. It'd be good to also like reference the dictionary. But I think of variation, right? Like you have a group of things or a group of people. When there's diversity among them, there's differences. And That I think is the most simplest version, right? Is like there's a group of people. They're not just homogenous. They're not all the exact same. They don't think the same. They don't look the same. They don't act the same. There's just differences. And obviously, one of the interesting things with that broad definition is that no two people are the same, right? So there's always like some degree of diversity, um, and it could be applied to so many different things. But that's what I think of variation or differences amongst a group of things or people.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'd agree. And that's obviously because it's so broad, it can be taken in a lot of different ways, and we've seen it used as an agenda and stuff like that. For us, sort of minority Catholics, though, like how do you think we should view it, and what sort of value should we place on it? I feel like it's a dangerous place to be, right? Like we don't want to be
Yeah.
act like we have some sort of stool or a step above other people who aren't minorities. It's like, oh no, we have something to say. It's our time to say
Right.
something. Like, I don't really like that. But what do you like? How do you think we should look at it? What value should we place on diversity?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and I talk about this a lot. I write about it a lot. Not a lot, not as much as I'd like to, but I am working on eventually writing a book on this. I have like 25,000 words for it on race in the church and things like that, and racism, BLM.
Hmm.
And it's tough because like when I write and I talk about it, it's interesting to see how it kind of convicts both sides. Because I think on the right within the church, we have this hesitancy to admit that diversity is valuable, right? Like it is good. And I think that's most clear when I wrote my letters on racism back in 2020. When I My first letter was to white friends and family. I talked about, or I had this line in there where I said, do you remember the last time you were the only person of your race in the room? And most white people do. For those of us who are minorities in the church, we don't, right? Because you probably have this happen all the time, right? Like it happened to me at family reunions growing up, right, on my mom's side, and then there was times where sometimes I'd be the most light skinned person in the room on my dad's side. But most white people, I noticed with my friends as I was growing up, whenever they were the only white person, we were at the barbershop or going to play basketball, they always pointed it out, right? Like it was uncomfortable. They always noticed it. And it's like, well, imagine that discomfort, but when you're in mass, you know, and then you have some older white person who's looking at you that maybe you sat in their pew, and they might just be rude and grumpy. Sometimes old church ladies are just rude and grumpy, right? But you do have this kind of wonder when you are the only person of your skin color in the church and they're looking at you funny or not being friendly. It's almost impossible to not wonder, is does that play a role in it, right? Like I'm tatted, you know what I mean? I'm in my polo and slacks or whatever, but it's like, does this have an effect on the way they look at me? And it's possible. But the other side of it is that diversity for diversity's sake gets really dangerous, because it gets most dangerous when it's forced diversity. And we don't value what I was talking about earlier of all the different forms of diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of, because you could look at it. Jordan Peterson is really good at this, at taking things and saying, well, maybe it's not as simple as you think, right? So our 5 people who were all raised upper middle class, all went to Catholic private schools all their lives, but 2 are Hispanic, 2 are black, and 1's white, different or more diverse or less diverse than 5 white people one from the absolute lower class, raised in a trailer park, that has risen to the middle class, one who was raised middle class, one who was raised upper class, one who's an immigrant from Italy, and one who's, you can think of something else, right? Or they have five very different professional backgrounds. Like we have this obsession with thinking of race as the being the, sometimes just the primary, but sometimes going as far as I think it's the exclusive factor in diversity. And obviously, sex or gender plays a role in that as well in modern day society. But I think that's what we have to start to value, is to say, how can we have this like virtues in the mean, to be like, it is nice to have representation. There's no doubt about it. Like I'd rather not be the only black person in the room. It's just true. And I can't help but notice it sometimes. I do go a lot of my life without noticing it. It's not constantly on my mind when I'm the only black person in the room, but it is nice, you know what I mean, to not be. But at the same time, I'm not trying to have these, kind of like you were talking about. I don't want like racial advantages, or to be like held up as prominent, or be able to like share my black experience in a way that's gonna degrade fellow white Catholics. Which I think all comes to primarily seeing ourselves as Catholic first, and then seeing each other, Catholic first, we both love God, and then thinking, how can we best love our neighbor, kind of from there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's funny because I think, like you were saying, right, as conservatives, we can kind of try to like dust it off and act like it doesn't matter, but it does. Like I think, and when I look back in my life and things like that, and like watching like competition shows or stuff like that, like I'm gonna root for the guy that looks most like me, probably. Or if that guy's
Right.
like a D-bag, then I'm gonna go for someone who's like just a good guy or whatever. But a lot of times it's like those natural things. And like, okay, for me, for instance, I'm Guamanian, Lebanese, Indonesian, and Dutch mostly. So like, there's actually literally no one like me except for my brother. Like he's the only person that's exactly like
Holy
me.
cow.
So yeah, like and like you said, I'm used
You're like
to
a
like
quarter from each continent.
yeah, it's everything I could possibly be. Like when people they always ask me like, "What are you?" I just say I'm just not black or Mexican. That's like the two things that I basically, everything else I basically am. But no, I mean it's true, right? There's a lot of things of like, even growing up for me, the closest thing to me was like Filipino necessarily, but it's like I'm not Filipino, so it's just like there's just so many different cultures and stuff, and you do try to seek that out, I think, in some ways. And there's a certain level of importance. This is the reason why I felt a calling to try to do at least ministry and podcasts and bring you on and things like that, because there are kids who want to see. At least I knew I did want to see more people like me living out their faith in an authentic way.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think like I said, I think you just raised a good point. Those are some things that do matter, and it's just important that we don't get caught up in that to the point where it's like all we think about, right? I mean, there's so much more important things than just having different skin colors or things like that, for sure. But yeah, I think you touched on a lot of things, right? In terms of like when is it important and when it's not. But one of the things I think is interesting with diversity and kind of the climate that we're in, I think unfortunately what we see a lot is minority Catholics not necessarily thinking a lot like us. Like I'd like to think that if you're Catholic, you understand what that means. You're Orthodox and everything. And when we talk about conservatism, we're really discussing, I think a basic definition is you're conserving past values, traditions, morals, and things like that. It's kind of the whole idea. Whereas like progressivism is progressing forward, like kind of like almost this like Marxist idea of you're continually in this way of history until you get to that point where you're supposed to be in some sort of utopia or whatever.
Sure.
So, one of the things I think it's important to talk about, it might be a tough question for you though, is why do you think that majority of minority Catholics tend to be more liberal?
Yeah, no, that's not a tough question. I don't think at all. I think it's one that a lot of people get uncomfortable with talking about. I think in talking about just racism in America, one of the things I often like to point out is this phrase called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I can't remember off the top of my head who like first coined it, but basically that concept is it's the voter ID law, right? Like the the uproar and backlash against the voter ID law in Georgia is a great example of that, right? Like you heard President Biden saying, like black people and brown people in the country like can't drive to the DMV, like they can't use the internet to figure out how to get a license or an identification card, right? Poor black and brown people, not poor people in the country, but poor white people can do it, but poor black and brown people can't do it. Or when he had that kind of cognitive slip where he said poor kids are just as smart and just as bright as white kids,
Yeah.
And there's kind of this, or you see it in the Smithsonian's thing with Ibram Kendi, where it's talking about like whiteness, the qualities of whiteness are like timeliness, hard work, kindness, politeness. It's like, dude, so what does that mean for black people? It's pretty crazy. And I think that soft bigotry of low expectations really bleeds into the church. And the way that I see it the most in the church is that black and brown people are never challenged like many other people or especially white, Anglo countries, to kind of conform to the church. There's like this fear of like the combativeness of, and black people and brown people are very proud and they are very strong-willed, and I love that, but I think there's this, well, we have to allow the drums, or in Spanish masses the guitars and all these things because it's cultural, and that was one of the things we kind of seen come out of Vatican II, especially the spirit of Vatican II, not necessarily in the documents of Vatican II or the letter of Vatican II, but definitely in the spirit of it, where it was like everything had to be super cultural. And so therefore, when I just find this incredible correlation and have in my lifetime of orthodoxy and conservatism and unorthodox, Catholicism and liberalism, or progressivism, better said. And so I think that's why we have that. And I think it kind of flows that way for a lot of black and brown Catholics, where it's like you have these Father James Martin types who are, more interested in addressing, the Jesuits are much more interested in addressing some of the issues of race, or at least taking those issues seriously, or hearing them out, or speaking about them. And they have the unorthodox faith. And then so it's kind of like this, I think, cycle of just madness, right? And irrationality that leads from unorthodoxy into progressivism and back around again. And I think just like when I was 18 and I registered as a Democrat, I always say I was very drawn as a young Christian, and especially as a young black Christian, to the issues of social justice, right? And it seems on the surface, no doubt about it, they're definitely better at marketing and acting like they care about people. Democrats, I mean. So it seems on the surface like they're the ones who really care, And so if you don't go any deeper into it, and you have priests and religious leaders who are doing, have unorthodox liturgy and liturgical abuses, then I think it's very likely and it's very understandable how so many people are drawn to that, and then they have this desire to not be the only black person in the church. And just like the Republican Party, I think, is really bad at advertising to black and brown people, so are Orthodox Catholic churches. I think they're really bad in their marketing and inviting people who don't look like them or think like them to come to Mass. And so you kind of have this like congregation, and either they go there because they're unorthodox, or because they're liberal, or because they want to be around other black people. And then the other two of the three start to come more alive in their lives as they go on. And they're more likely to be empathetic towards LGBT stuff, towards BLM, towards illegal immigration, all those other things that follow.
Yeah. Well, that's, I hadn't really thought about it in those type of ways before. Cause for me, when I'm thinking about it, it's like, well, a lot of, I grew up in California. So you're around a lot of Mexicans and Filipinos, where it's a very cultural Catholic place for them. Right. And there's not, and I don't think a lot of it's their fault. I think it's hard to be, really educated back in like the 1700s or something, or 1500s, when the Catholicism was first brought to your country. I don't know how you can know so much depth. You just take, you have something like Guadalupe and you hold on to that faith as much as possible. And, right. You pass it down as best you can, maybe. And it becomes a point where, it becomes on each generation, though, to figure out for themselves why they're, a lot of people maybe aren't asking themselves that question. But I think one of the interesting things that I kind of want to dive into a little bit is sort of that idea of like, for me, right? Like we were just talking about, like we want to look for that representation, but I'm not going to lie, dude, when I see like another minority Catholic, maybe younger, I'm like for sure sizing them up being like, dude, where do you stand? Like I really want to know,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like if you're wearing a
for
mask at
sure.
mass, if you're wearing like a mask
Yeah.
at mass, I'm like, I don't know if we can really be. And at Franciscan, so like there's a lot of times that we were just talking about like being the only person in the room, dude. I was like the token brown guy like 90% of the time in
Oh
at
yeah, I
Franciscan,
bet.
which is like fine. I don't care. Like I really don't, because like I'm with people who understand, real Catholic truth, and they're building me up and we're making each other better, and we don't care about any of that nonsense. And I'd rather be with those people 10 out of 10 times, if they're white, I don't care who it is, those people, than sit there and try to force something with people who I don't think are on maybe the same level of thought or understanding the same sorts of
Absolutely.
tradition and orthodoxy that we place emphasis on. That actual cat, like I don't even know. Like I think the term even like a liberal Catholic is just nonsense. Like, doesn't even make sense. Like it just can't be. Like when you have like this, when you have 2,000 years of tradition, there's no such thing as like a progressive Catholic. It's just, I don't think you're Catholic at
Right.
that point, right? But I think it's interesting to dive into. I don't know if you have anything to comment on that, but yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think everything you just said, you put words to what I was just thinking before you even said it. But I think that's why you're not going to be divorced in 30 years. Because what a lot of people do in dating and marriage, and they do it with friends and they do it with the church they pick, is they prioritize stupid things like interests or hobbies over values and principles and faith and morals, right? And so that's what we're talking about, and that's what you and I stopped doing, or maybe you never did it, but that's what I stopped doing eventually. Where it was like, I want to hang out with people who look like me, who act like me, who are listening to the same music I do, and want to play basketball with me. To I got into college, and then when I was in the army, especially, I was like, man, I can't. I got to be careful who I spend all this time with, because I was away from kind of the Catholic bubble, and I knew I was very susceptible to fall back into my past lifestyle. And so I'm like, who I spend time with really matters. And I mean, that ultimately is why I'm marrying Emily, right? That's why we get along so well. Now we're lucky and blessed to have obviously hobbies and things we like to do together as well. But the main thing that like keeps us from fighting all the time, or fear of like breaking up, or things like that, is the fact that we share the same faith, we share the same like devotion to the faith. Not just we're both baptized Catholics, but like we share the same devotion to the faith. We understand its priority. We understand the priority of family, especially our family, that we're going to create and build together. And we understand the importance of evangelization. We understand the importance of conservative principles and values like allegiance and devotion to the truth, while also being compassionate in our Catholicism and trying to, make the world a better place while we're here. And so, yeah, man, I think that's the whole thing. Is like, would I love to have more Black Catholics at Mass? Yes, or at my parish, absolutely. Do I want more liberal Catholics at my parish? No. And so it's hard for even us people of color, to not be judgmental or to be concerned or fear, when that happens, just because you get so conditioned by it. And it kind of makes me think too, when you talked earlier about like prominent Catholic speakers, and like there's been this increase in demand for diversity, especially in things like NCYC and stuff like that. Like some of these like bigger Catholic conferences are pretty in committed to that kind of stuff, like diversity and things like that.
Mm.
And it's funny to see. I'm like, I'll never be one of those people because I'm too conservative. You know, like the black people whose voices do get elevated within the church for some reason or another are almost always the liberal ones. And so it's something that you have to kind of choose between. But for those, for you and I, it's very consoling, obviously, and it's God's plan. Like God will hearts and do whatever He wants with our lives, right, in our ministries. But it's very, to me, emboldening to know that when we speak about these things in this way, like we're not doing it for our own personal advantage. You know, like we must believe it and we must think it's true in order to say it, because it's not like we're just coasting along with the wind. Because I think that I have the talent and the ability to speak with some of these other speakers, but I'm not willing to, get up
Yeah.
and cry about racism
Yeah.
or sexism or
Yeah.
any other woke stuff they want me to talk about. So,
Yeah, no,
so be it.
there's something I wasn't really planning on diving into this too much, but I feel like, dude, it's when I'm really thinking about it, and I bring up that point of like, yeah, I'd want to see more people like me, but then when I do, I'm like really questioning, like, okay, dude, like,
Yeah.
like, are you sure that you're really about this, or like, I don't know, just other things, and maybe those aren't. I don't know, maybe those aren't the right thoughts or whatever, but those are really what I feel of like, okay, let me try to like vet this guy out and see, is this guy really about it in the same ways? Because that's what's more important, I guess,
Right.
right? When you see those people. But one of the things I always talk about and that frustrates me is how the Protestants have such a hold on the younger generation. It seems like we miss out all the time, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
and a lot of it has come from a period of, I think, starting with the sort of spirit of Vatican II and stuff, and just the churches that they just started making are just so ugly with their like red
Oh, yeah.
carpet stuff and everything that's just, and you get to a point,
Felt
I think
banners.
yeah, yeah, the felt,
Circle
the classic,
churches. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, and I think the point I'm getting to is really that we lost so much of like trying to go out and understand the depth of our faith, like the beauty that we once hold. And I'd rather, there's like 15 Catholic churches in a particular city. It's like I'd rather have less and have them be beautiful than try and do all this like. We just started catering so much to people where it's like, oh no, we have to make it a 5-minute drive, but we don't have the funds to, or the church used to really help try to fund art, beautiful art. I mean, we paid the biggest artists in the world, the Da Vinci's or Michelangelo's and things like that. And I think we just
Right.
lost so much, and we're losing this youth battle because there's like, I guess, this conflict that we're talking about, right? It's the idea that no, you don't really care about that stuff. You don't care about simply aesthetics or how things look or maybe the vibes of something are, but at the same time it's like you kind of do though. And I think there's got to be some proper balance between those, because like once again, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing a ministry. It's like I'm not seeing that target to the young audience, because no matter how hard someone like maybe a Scott Hahn does, who's better than I'll ever be, who's smarter than I'll ever be, all that kind of stuff, there's still a certain level of disconnect. So it does matter to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I guess I'm asking, like, how do you find that balance? Where is that at? And sort of like, do you get at least where I'm coming from, in the sense that when I look at, okay, let's see, when I go through Instagram, right? And I'm like, I see a good clip. This guy's got, he's got a nice fit on. The video quality's great. He's speaking some truth. 9 times out of 10, it's some, Rich Wilkerson or this or that guy. And it's like, I think there's room for Catholics to try to take some of that space in social media and try to be that without losing real authenticity, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
advocating for all of us to wear, off-white shoes to mass and, like their services are and those kind of things. Not that point, but don't you think there's room for us to try to at least push ourselves a little bit more? Like you think about, there's no prominent Catholic speaker that really has that same level of connection and like, maybe followers or audience. And I think that's for a reason, as a Rich Wilkerson or Chad Veach or whoever it may be. But I think there's some room, right, on at least on the social media or Instagram, for us to start pushing ourselves. Like, why can't we go out and do more? Why are we not talking to this group or that group? Like, there's more that we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things you're gonna see the deeper you get into ministry too, that I've learned a lot, in my years getting out of the army, getting to see some other ministries and getting to meet more of these like more prominent Catholic speakers and things like that. Because before I had never met any. Like when I was in college and I went to seek, like all of those speakers, you know what I mean, were like rock stars to me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've met a lot of them over the last few years, and it's been pretty interesting to me. But one of the things I think really happens to people is when it does become your full time job, it is difficult to not start to conform in some way or another. Right. So that's why a lot of them won't speak out against BLM
Mm-hmm.
penetrating the church or the LGBT stuff. Like they're just silent on that. And you'll see these speakers, these Catholic speakers who have done great work, and they've been incredible chastity speakers, or just generally like theologians, or their apologetics are really strong, but they're afraid to talk about these difficult topics because it's like, well, what will that do to my speaking engagements, to book sales, to all these other things? And so that's the challenge, I think, in the ultimate kind of dichotomy is how do we remain relatable? Because the other thing that always got me too, so like sometimes people complain, right? Because I curse on my podcast or I curse on Instagram, right? I never take the Lord's name in vain, never any GDs, never even, even non-curse words take the Lord's name in vain. But I curse every now and then, and I'm like, what's funny to me about it is I've spent so much time with all these Sikh speakers, and they all curse, but then it's like there's like this persona that they have to the world, and I don't. And one of the things that I wanted to not have is like I don't have a persona. You know what I mean? It's like, bro, if we were chilling together in person, like this is what I talk about. This is how I talk. These are things that I say. And if I wouldn't curse in front of you, I'm not. I mean, this is your podcast. I don't know what you do on yours, so that's a little bit different. But if you were on mine, like I'm not going to say anything to you on my podcast that I wouldn't say to you in normal life. And some people do, and there's times and reasons, especially if you're doing stuff for kids or whatever, that you want to be different in that. But my point with that, I think, is an example of one of many things where there's like this inauthenticity of these people have all these conservative views but don't want to share them because they're afraid of the pushback. They talk a certain way or act a certain way or dress a certain way, but you start to change over time. And it's really interesting to me because I think it's almost like, obviously it's horrible, like the term Uncle Tom or, these Oreos and all this stuff that a lot of people of color get when they are conservative is really ugly. But I think it's really interesting that, I am still bothered by Black Catholic speakers who are on the conservative side that don't actually learn anything about the topic of racism and go speak about it. This happened at Benedictine. I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a pretty big like Catholic speaker. And he went and he talked about racism, and they asked him about like Ibram Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates and some of these like prominent Black leaders in the progressive movement. And he just had like no idea even who they were. And I'm like, why would you come speak? And like, not everybody needs to be an expert on everything. But if you're going to come speak about it, like you have to do the work. You have to do the learning, right? And you should, as a Black Catholic, when you know this is so divisive within Black Catholics, if you care about Black Catholics, that's why I learned about that stuff, right? That's why I started learning apologetics, because I cared about my friends and family members and Bible study attendees who had these questions. That's why I learned the answers, right? I was already convinced. I didn't need to know, why people think, like, how to defend the fact that we don't pray to Mary. But some people weren't coming to mass because of that. And so I learned the answer to that question, right? And so that's the same way that I think we have to approach all of these issues, is those things are keeping people away from God. They're keeping people away from Christ. And so is our inauthenticity and our lack of willingness to truly be who we are. And I think we just have to try to do that. And we don't know if it'll work. You know that like cleaning up and polishing and kind of being a certain type of person that gives a certain type of talks, a certain type of way will be successful. What we're experimenting with now, and we have all these new platforms and things like social media and podcasts to try it, is if we can still be us and still, make a positive impact in the lives of other people. But yeah, I think it's hard, man. It's hard when you don't have that, the high quality people who dress like you or look like you or into the stuff that you're into. Because it's just devastating when you hold somebody up and then you kind of realize like, wow, we have nothing in common. Yeah. Ultimately, you can still learn from people who you don't have anything in common with. Yeah. But it's still different because you're like, how do I emulate that?
Yeah. It's funny. I think I was, when I was sitting there and I asked the question, right? Like, where are we wrong in it? I think there's a certain level though of, let's say people like me and you, right? We both got tattoos. Mine are on my leg, so you can't really see them yet. But, even like, for instance, my parents aren't big fans of that I have that or whatever. And I think there's a certain level, right, of maybe people like us who are going to try to come up. And I don't know if people want to give us the platform, because I even have a friend who went to an FSSP parish his whole life and stuff. And then he got a couple tattoos on his arms. and he went to mass in like a short sleeve button up, and they saw, and then he had certain moms and parents coming up to his mom saying like, hey, we don't want your son coming around here because we don't want our kids to see that and now want to do it. And it's like, so you mean to tell me, right, like here I am at generally what's going to be the most traditional parishes and things like that, something that like, you know, I look forward to being a part of once I'm closer to one, because I do love the Latin Mass and stuff. That's why I try to attend to on Sundays and things like that. But then it's like you're going to get some of that sometimes, right? So it's like maybe the reason why we don't have more of the Bob Lesnevsky, I don't know if you know Bob Lesnevsky, but I could imagine throughout his whole career, his entire ministry that he's been doing, that he's just been maybe undermined because it's like, oh, you know, no, you look like this and we don't want our kids to be around you and doing that. And I think that might be part of the issue too, right? Like, I think I can't completely just discredit people, but maybe it's like sometimes the church itself, and being the people of the church, maybe like not even letting those people come up and really have a platform.
Right. Dude, that's one of the things that gives me the most confidence with kind of where we're at, right? Like kind of in this like Orthodox Catholic, conservative kind of pocket of the church and world, while also still being like kind of uncomfortable to a lot of people in that realm. You know what I'm saying? Because I think you're exactly right. And when I got, especially my forearm tattoos done, sorry, my dog's playing with her toy. But when I got those, there were certain people in my life who were not big fans as well. And what I came to and talking with some of, you know, family and stuff like that, was it kind of came down to this, what will people think mentality, right? And like my question all along was like, but can you explain to me how it's a sin? Right? Like I mean, it's Jesus and the Blessed Virgin Mary, you know, on my forearm. And I'm like, if you have arguments for that, like that's something I'll hear, but you're just worried about people's opinions. And I'm not. Like that's where we're disagreeing on this topic. And so just kind of leaving it at that. But I think there is the thing that a lot of the left, I think the leftist Catholics, when you see like Reformed Catholicism on Instagram or New Ways Ministry, like they feel like they're the ones that are kind of like pushing back against the Pharisees, right? Because they get so much pushback from the religious leaders. But it's like, no, you're just like objectively going against like the church herself, right? Like violating scripture. Like Jesus didn't come and be like, you know, just absolutely violate the Torah, right? Like just violate the Old Testament and he came to fulfill it. He did not come to just abolish it and be like, no, that's wrong. And he was Jesus, right? These are just regular humans who come and just completely violate church teaching, scripture, and think somehow that they're doing Christ's work, like angering the Pharisees. And this goes all the way to like cardinals in Europe, you know, who are like blessing same-sex marriages and things like that, same-sex unions. But I think it's what makes me feel good about where we're at is we get to do both of that, right? Like we're challenging them, which to me is challenging the world, the leftist Catholics who are just like leftist everybody else. It's just that they go to mass sometimes, but they have the same beliefs as everybody of the world, right? They're children of the world that think they're pushing back against Pharisees, but they're really just one with the world. And then, but we also make people uncomfortable on, you know, in the church sometimes because there are people in the church who are racist, or there are people in the church who hate tattoos or hate people wearing hoodies, or, you know, like they just hate different things that we do. They might hate your hat, you know, like, you know, what it'll be if you're at like a church, you know, picnic and you're dressed the way that you are now, they might hate that. And it's like, that's okay. Cause your hat's not sinful, right? Your hoodie's not sinful. And so that is, I think we do have these Pharisees who are usually very lukewarm in the faith, very culturally Catholic, but they go to mass every Sunday and they're mad about this guy with tattoos, right? I've always thought it was so interesting, both at Dynamic Catholic and here with Hallow, is we get to work with a lot of church people, and occasionally you get people being rude to you, and it's always like this same kind of person that has this same kind of spirit. They're like, you know, in their 50s or so, 50s or 60s. They go to mass often, very culturally Catholic, no actual prayer life, right? Like you can just tell, like there's no mental prayer ability. Like it's just, you know, go to mass, survive, and then you're Catholic. But they're angry, they push back, they get upset about the little things of all this stuff. And it's like what I've always laughed about, dog, is I'm like, I have to evangelize your kids because you're the type of Catholic whose kids don't go. None of your kids go to mass. They're not getting married in the church. And what I'm trying to do, even though you're mad at me, even though you hate me for the way I do it or the way I dress or the way my tattoo, whatever, I'm like, I'm the one who your kids come across on social media or my podcast or whatever that reach out to me and are like, what you're talking about earlier of like, wow, I didn't know people like me did this. I didn't know you could be happy and Catholic. I didn't know you could, you know. And
Yeah.
so it's really crazy, man. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely gets me worked up. But it
No.
helps me to just feel good about where we're at. Kind of, it's
Yeah.
not in the middle, but I just feel like it's where we're supposed to be. You know, of
Yeah.
like
No,
challenging people.
100%.
And I do it with BLM and race sometimes too, to be like, hey, these people aren't necessarily stupid. Even though it's easy to say that, it's easy to
Yep.
do that. But they're just kind of they're brainwashed by the
Yeah.
media, by TV, by society to believe that race is the biggest issue in the world, and we have to be compassionate towards that. I know you don't like that, but we have
Yeah.
to. You know,
Yeah.
like that's what God wants us to do, while still standing firm in the truth. But
Yep.
it's a classic conundrum of you have either all love and no truth, which is love, or you have all truth with no love, and both of them are wrong.
Dude, it's a classic Catholic both and, right? I mean, for like literally
Yep.
everything. And I think one of the issues with society is that everything that and this is everyone, not everyone in society. I think people always want to make things black and white, and 90% of the time it's never black and white.
Yep.
You know, for big issues, right? Truth is truth, no matter what. There's no for instance, marriage is black and white and some of these things. But I think some of those maybe smaller topics or moral issues, quote unquote, of like tattoos, which I don't think is a moral issue. But there's just, it's not everything so black and white. But it's funny because, you know, what people see. So like one of my, like I said, and I'm not trying to like bring out my parents right now, because obviously I do ministry with my dad and stuff like that. But you know, like we've had talks about tattoos and stuff like that, which is fine. It's okay to have disagreements with your parents. Like I think it's a good thing even to bring up.
Sure.
And I have a nose piercing. I got a hoop in my left ear and stuff like that. Made sure it's the left ear, by the way, because you gotta be educated on that stuff. But 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 the thing is that I look at it, right. Okay, and there's something. There's something.
You gotta be educated.
You have to be educated on
That's
that. That's a touchy one. But I don't know if you've ever listened to Father Ripperger. Have you listened to Father Ripperger, Father Chad Ripperger
Oh, yeah.
before?
Yeah, he spoke at Benedictine last year, and I got to meet him briefly.
Oh wow.
So, yeah, that's where I got introduced to him.
Yeah, I love Father Ripperger. Then he's come out, and I've heard some things about him saying, you know, being careful about getting sinful in the sense of sort of making too much. I don't know what the word is, but basically trying to become an individual too much, trying to stand out too much can become sort of sinful, which I understand, right? Like I understand the pushback on tattoos or piercings and things like that. Like I bleached my head, I might have bleached my hair a couple of times before and things like that. But for me, like how I'm looking at it, to be honest, and maybe it's not the right way, right? But I see when I have this piercing, and I do it because like it feels like me. Like I'm not trying to be inauthentic or trying to be someone that I'm not. It feels like who I am. I've always wanted these kind of things. I'm like probably gonna get a lot more tattoos. Unfortunately, like I don't have any in my arms. I'm probably gonna change that in a few years and things like that. But when I see it, it's like, dude, the same thing that's making those people angry, right? We're just basically talking about the Catholic Karens. Like the same thing that makes the Catholic Karens angry is the same thing that's bringing, like what you said, the youth to the church. It's the same exact thing. That's the difference between, right? Like, okay, when I go to mass, dude, I promise you, like you're not going to see me in a hoodie and jeans. Like it's just not how it's going. I know, I understand that I'm coming to, you know what I mean, the wedding banquet, the feast, and all this kind of stuff. Like I understand those things. I'll never be disrespecting there. But if we're outside of church, I'm gonna be swagging out. I'm gonna do my best to my best ability. I'm gonna be bringing my best fits. I'm make sure all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's the both and that we lost. Right? We're talking about extremes. It's like it seems like maybe for a lot of Protestants, they're on the extreme of like too much aesthetics and some of that vibe, and they're losing some of the real identity of what the traditional church is. Like we can't just put a stage and call it church. It's not what it is. So it's like it's got to be both and there's a middle ground, like you were saying. And I think that's so important. That's one of the things I'm super passionate about. Like I figured out in my life, right? Like I started out and I was in high school and I was like, listening to Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and Jordan Peterson, all these people. And I was like, dude, I want to be like a politics guy. And then I'm just way too anxious. Like me trying to come up with all these like arguments for everything just made me, dude, I was stressed out so much. I got to a point where like I'd only let myself watch political videos. And I was like, well, I'm going to die at like 24 if I keep doing this. Like, there's just no way I can do that. I'm just going to have I'm going to have a heart attack. There's just no way. And then, so like, I've always been searching, okay, like where, because I felt so called, like, where is it at? And now I've realized like, I'm kind of in this spirit, like, I'm sorry, but like, don't really refer to me for questions on like these super deep theological stuff. We have like Patrick Madrid and Trent Horn for that. Like they're way better, trust me.
Absolutely.
But at least in terms of like trying to be relatable to the youth, right? Trying to figure out what's this ground, where are we missing these people? I want to find those people. I want to find the Miko at 15 that's just like in this space of like, he understands that the value of what Catholicism is and doesn't deny it to be the truth, but is having such a hard time trying to get away from like listening to, you know, J. Cole and Kendrick and Young Thug or whoever it may be, like I was in high school, and being like, I don't know if I can do both. And it's still something I struggle with, like with music and stuff. I'm still like trying so hard to be like, okay, I know I can't keep listening to, you know, secular music and do all this. And I'm, you know, being on a podcast puts more of pressure on me. I think it's in James talking about teaching and what that does to you. And so, you know, I feel that all the time, but it's like, I think that's a good thing. I'm not coming on, you know, I don't think we're doing ministry because we feel like we have it all figured out. I think we're doing ministry because we're revealing that, no, you don't have to have everything figured out in order to be a Catholic. That's the whole point of this. It's a journey and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, once again, I'm bringing you on, so I don't want to talk too much about this topic, but I get fired up on it too.
There's another great analogy you just reminded me of too. And this is a great story. And Emily and I have shared this before too in our podcast we've done together. Emily's my fiance. And so we always call this kind of like the dichotomy of masculinity, right? And so when we first started dating, and she would talk about, you know, she wasn't a big fan of the tattoos. I like to drive fast. I want to, you know, do the dangerous things like jet skiing like crazy. We went jet skiing like a month into dating, and she like thought I was insane, and kind of these like more just like casually like semi-dangerous things, right? Owning guns, whatever. Like she's not anti-guns at all, but just things like that, for example, right? It's what she came to find out is like she hated, or she didn't hate, but she didn't like or didn't want to date, definitely didn't want to marry one of these like soft, nice, you know, Catholic boys, right? But at the same time, when I actually did the things that like embodied, you know, or like personified my masculinity, she didn't like those either. And so she's kind of like, okay, now I'm starting to see that you don't get one without the other, right? Like, yeah, he's a little, you know, aggressive at times when he's playing sports or he's competitive or whatever, but that also leads into his protectiveness and why I feel safe when I'm with him, you know? And that's exactly what I think is the interesting kind of same dichotomy of these Catholic Karens, as you so perfectly called them, is they don't start to understand that like you can't necessarily have one without the other. We're losing all the youth, we're losing all these people, and then when we are the people who they can look up to, who they relate to, they're like, no, but don't do that. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's like, dude, what? You know, and you have these boomer Catholics who it's like, dog, didn't your generation like ruin the church?
Yeah, literally.
Like y'all aren't Orthodox anyways. Like your generation was the one that literally, like, you've been alive for all of this, like this whole decrease in vocations and mass attendance and baptisms and marriages and all. Like you already had your shot, dog. Like that's what blew my mind with these like 60 somethings who would be like, oh, we don't need an app and we don't need this and we don't. And I'm like, what? I'm somebody who tries to respect my elders, right? Like I try to learn from the wisdom of the past. I read a lot of older books and try to, you know, take after these Jordan Peterson types and these wise men as Tom and Souls. But I'm like, but not all of y'all, you know, like, but I'm not of the mindset that age, that wisdom just comes with age, because it doesn't.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Holiness comes with age. It doesn't. And so I'm like, I've had too many people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s tell me, man, you're really bright. Man, I wish I knew what you like. I wish I was like you at your age. I wish I was that into my faith at your age for me to be like, for me to go there and take somebody that's exactly like them and be like, oh, I need to take your opinion. I need to change who I am because you seem to have it all figured out. You and your kids who don't go to mass anymore. Thank you for your advice.
Yeah.
But there's this like unwillingness to have the dichotomy. And it's the same thing we see with the feminization of the church. Is like you have, and it's these wonderful Catholic women, and there's a lot of great Catholic women out there, but feminism also bled into the church the same way that, this other diversity stuff did with race. But feminism bled into the church. We made things so feminine, feminine readers, altar servers, all these different things, right? Female readers, altar servers, the push for female ordination. And then they're like, where are all the men? And I'm like, you pushed them out. I love hearing a 6-year-old woman whose husband doesn't come to mass be like, where are all the men at some unorthodox parish? And I'm like, what? Like I'm 28. Like what do you think I've been Catholic for 15 years. Like, do you think I pushed them away? Like, why would I have the answer to that if you don't? You've been around twice as long as me. You pushed them away. You demanded that you could read. You demanded that your daughter could be an altar server. And now everybody except for the priest up there is a woman. Yep. And you're like, where are the men? Yep. You tell me. Yep. I'm like, they're at the Latin Mass parish. They're at the Ad Orientem parish down the street that has male readers and only boy altar servers. Yep. That's where they are. Yep. Yeah, no. But there's that dichotomy where it's like, well, we don't want both. Yep. And it's like, well, you have to.
Yeah, the dichotomy is so. Yeah, the dichotomy is so on point because one of the things, I don't know, maybe my parents won't like me saying this, but like one of the things I love about the parents that I have, right, is that, dude, if you play, right, we'll say it's on the radio, all right, for their sake. Let's just say we turn on the radio by accident. We hit the throwback station and it's playing Boys in the Hood by NWA. My parents know every word of that song. That's what I love about them. They're not playing that. They're not putting in the aux cord and playing NWA. But it's like that's who they were at one point, and that's why it makes them so special now. Like that's why when I see them, I'm like, that's the way I am, right? Like my parents put me on to Boys II Men and a lot of this stuff and some old Usher or whatever it is, and I love that. I love those aspects about it, and I think that's what's gonna like separate some of us. And I think there is room for both. There's definitely not room for a whole lot of NWA, but the point is like there is room for those people who feel that way, right? And like true. I think we suck in a lot of aspects in terms of like Catholics trying to make music or movies, and a lot of things are just like we just try way too hard to do something. It's like all you have to do is speak truth, and speak truth isn't always just like has to be like Jesus every second of every movie, and doesn't have to be just like God is not dead. Sometimes like truth is as simple as like even in The Dark Knight, right? A whole theme of that series is like not trusting the government, so the corruption and the whole thing about Batman. Like those are just truths in themselves, and I think that reveals something. So I think like sometimes we try way too hard with that. But yeah, that dichotomy. And then also what you're talking about with advice, dude. Oh my gosh. Do you know how many people have come up to me that are divorced telling me not to get married? And it's like, I got married at 20 and everyone's like, what are you doing? I'm just like trying not to be like you probably. Like I don't want to be the, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to be, or like I'll talk to guys at work. Like I worked at Sherwin-Williams, dude. I'm working with like 40-year-olds and like, they're not hating, but I'm just saying like sometimes they'd be like, oh wow, like a lot of people respect me for getting married young, but then I'll get some things that are like, people that are in their later 20s. I'm like, dude, I'm literally trying to not be you. Like that's exactly why I'm getting married, because I don't want to be 28, acting like I have everything figured out, pushing back the times or whatever it is. I'm not saying 28 because you're 28. That sounds disrespectful. But for the people that are like talking down on me, it's like, dude, I don't want to be living this bachelor life and thinking that I can still find fulfillment in those things. And it's like being a 20-year-old doesn't mean I don't have desires that are normal to most 20-year-olds, right? Like it's not like I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have any desire to go out and have fun and hit this up or that up, or go to the beach or on the spring breaks and stuff like that. But it's like there's a certain level of just becoming a man, and I think that's supposed to start at 18, but for some reason it starts at 34 for everyone else. Is that you have to be willing to say, okay, those aren't worth it. Like I've already found somebody, right? Like how long does it take? Like I met Ella, my wife, at 15 years old. So by the time I was 20, if I didn't figure out I was going to marry her, what the hell am I doing? Like, I'm just sitting there and just being like everyone else, It's like, no, I want to be able to live together and share life together. Well, what does that mean? And according to the truth, well, I have to get married then. So then I'm just going to do that and keep moving on with my life. It's not, I don't know. But yeah, that stuff irritates me so much. Yeah, I don't know. But I feel you on that, dude. I get so irritated with these people that are just like, want to talk down on me for getting married young, like I'm stupid or something like that. And it's just like, all right, dude, whatever. But
It's
anywho,
brutal.
yeah, I mean, that's how it is. I think sort of, as we kind of, it's so funny because we kind of like didn't go, I had these notes of like where I wanted to take the conversation, and we didn't necessarily like go right off of it, but then we kind of hit everything at the same time
That's funny.
as well. But I think one of my, last couple questions I want to ask about is like sort of bring it a little bit back, but I think it's going to help us kind of round out the conversation. It's like, what's this relationship you think with conservatism and Catholicism, right? Like it's something that I think I've seen a few of your posts just kind of saying how those two have gone together. And,
Yeah.
and I think orthodoxy and ever since I went to college, really just been very, I don't know, adamant about trying to put myself in the best churches or liturgies and things like that, and where I feel like just the most respectful and traditional and things like that. So like, where do you see that relationship, and why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it is complex, and it's one of my favorite things to think about. And I don't know if I think there's a strong correlation, I think, between when you become more conservative, you become more Catholic, or I should say, when you become more Catholic, you become more conservative. That's actually
Yeah,
where the way that I think that it rolls, not necessarily the
yeah,
other way around. But when you become more authentically Catholic, more orthodox in your faith, falling in love with the tradition, it's hard not to value the tradition of our country as well,
yeah,
and you get back to the same things that push Protestant to become conservative. Oftentimes, things like the church fathers, you think of like the fathers, the founding fathers of our country. There's
yeah,
so many parallels between that to say, okay, there's been a lot of corruption throughout the history of both the church and the United States. But you can still see that like the general direction has been good. Obviously, one's infallible, and so they're definitely not on the same playing field. But I think it's really easy that as you become more orthodox in your Catholicism, and you start to really allow your faith to take this primacy in your life and kind of be in the driver's seat and be like the truth and the faith, the way the truth and the life is the number one thing in my life. Then it's hard to not say, yeah, pro life is a one. I'd be a one issue voter for the pro life movement because of how central that is to Catholicism. To say, wow, you see the progressive left tearing down traditional marriage. Like marriage is the core of Christianity. You know what I mean? Like of the Christian family. Like the family
yeah,
is central to Catholicism. And you start to realize that when you start to realize again, you have an allegiance to the truth now as a Catholic, and you see gender theory and CRT and these things that degrade the human person and just blatantly lie and change the truth, the definition of the truth for many people.
mm,
You see the dangers of that, and so I think that it's almost impossible to grow in your Catholicism, like truly grow in it, and not become more conservative if you're actually seeking the truth and you're open to that. Now, on the other side of it, the things that I find uncomfortable within like the Republican Party or the conservative movement is that they value a lot of things over holiness.
mm-hmm,
And that I think is true for a lot of both Protestants and Catholics, but especially the Protestants who are within the conservative movement, which I think is such a danger for a lot of Catholics. Most of us are decent at still like recognizing that and not falling for it. But I do hope that as if I continue to be to grow as a voice within the conservative movement as well,
mm-hmm,
to point that out. You know what I mean? And like I think we need a certain type of prophet within the, and not saying I'm the prophet, but like a prophet type of figure or a movement, like a Jeremiah, Daniel, like even within the conservative movement to be like, it's not good to be Republican and not Christian. And a lot of people think that it is. And it's
yeah,
like you shouldn't be around so many Christians that allow you to do that and think that and not be made known of your
yeah,
error.
yeah,
But it's so easy to fall into this like nationalism or like
mm-hmm,
so many conservatives view America as like the modern day Israel, right? Like when
mm-hmm,
we will triumph, and it's like no, we could like it could end. And like what do
yeah,
you do if it ends? And that's why you see Protestantism and like this prosperity gospel and stuff like that. It is super Protestant, but Catholics do fall into it sometimes. But I do see that within the Catholic Church. And if you read like firstthings.com and some of those like more conservative Catholics that are usually pretty trad as well, that are very anti-liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting take on that where they do have some pretty strong criticisms of the founding fathers, of like the basics of liberalism and the kind of individualism that we have in the U.S., even in the founding documents, as it or from the perspective of Catholicism. Now, what I never hear from those types of Catholics who criticize like liberalism and the Constitution and things like that is
Yeah.
like, what's the better way with
Mm-hmm.
such a diverse country to live? You know, like I almost see them going in the same extreme as we see the left of being
Mm-hmm.
like, no, freedom of speech is not a Catholic thing. And I'm like, I agree, but like, what do you suggest we do? Get rid of it, and
Yeah.
then like when we're not in power, like I'm all for it. If we could like create like secede Texas and just have this like Catholic kingdom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I'm
have
for
Father
that too.
Mike as our king, like
Yeah.
I'd be all about it, man. But
Yeah.
I'm like, we can't. So like, what do you suggest we do? Because I also hate criticisms just for the sake of criticism,
Yeah.
And it's like there's no solution. And it's like, well, all right, that's all good and fine, but we can't teleport back and try to like convert the founding fathers to Catholicism. So what do you suggest that we do now?
Yep.
And so those are some of the things that I see as kind of the relationship between conservatism and Catholicism. And I think the pitfalls and dangers that you can fall into when you prioritize one or the other.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point too because, like, okay, let's not get anything twisted up. I'm gonna be voting Republican probably till I die. Like that's just how it's gonna
Yeah,
go
it's
because
very
of the two
likely.
issues that you said. I mean, specifically abortion and the marriage one's gonna be a tough fight. But I mean, specifically abortion itself and this the idea of subsidiarity and things like that that I'm always gonna tend to write. But it's important. Like I stopped trying to. I feel like for a long time I tried to defend the Republican Party on a lot of things, and it's like you got to understand, as Catholics we're Catholics, so there's a lot of things wrong within both. Now there's more things wrong within the left than the right, so therefore a lot of times we will affiliate with that party when voting. But there's a lot of things. It's like if you go read Pius IX or Leo XIII on things like Rerum Novarum and this idea of consumerism and only establishing things such as like when you create a business is like practical principles for businesses as like a Catholic social teaching and the idea of the common good. And I think a lot of times with the Republican Party, there can be like a lack of acknowledgement that like some things matter, like the idea of making things overseas and whatever it may be, maybe like child labor or some of those things. Those are actually issues. I think sometimes we try to brush it off by saying, "Oh no, but everyone gets it cheaper." And it's like, I think we lost the idea of we're supposed to be the
Some
moral
morality.
party. Yeah, we're supposed to be the moral party, but we just said, that doesn't matter because everything's cheaper. So like there's a place for both. And unfortunately, I think maybe you were kind of getting at this too, is that some, of the Catholic conservatives don't really want to bring that up. And they may even be kind of mad with it. I know regular conservatives are. They get super defensive of like, we have to, for some reason, I think a lot of times you have to put yourself in these two bubbles of like this very strict guidelines of what to believe. And the Republicans one's getting just bigger and bigger too, by the way. It's not even, I mean, it's barely conservative for like most things, but
Right.
it's just funny how we like feel like we have to force ourselves into those. And it's like, you actually don't. Like you can say that what we have in the free market, I don't really like calling it capitalism too much, but I guess, to a certain extent, yeah. That's the best that we have available, which is what the church teaches. But you can also be able to criticize it without having to immediately become a socialist. Like it's just there's a middle ground for a lot of things here. Or you can say that, oh, you know what? I think there is some room for sustainability without being a tree hugger and then being Greta Thunberg and rowing your way across the ocean. Like there's certain, you know what I mean? Like there's certain things that we can do. We can make a better effort. We can be more moral and ethical in the way we conduct business and stuff like that, which is not what this podcast is about. Maybe we can have another episode about that though. I'd love to bring you back on for that. But I think my last question though,
Yeah.
as we kind of wrap it up, is sort of, we talked a lot about basically everything. And I just want to know kind of like, where do you see society moving? I tend to be a pessimist myself, but I think I am actually pretty optimistic about where we're going and things like you said, right? The opportunities that I think we had that we wouldn't have before to have a voice and be a witness for people. So like, what's your kind of outlook on society moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I think that we're undoubtedly heading into worse before we get better. I think the question is, how long will it continue to get worse before it gets better? I think these next two elections in 22 and 24 are going to be massive. I have a lot of reservations and concerns about Trump running again in 24. I'm very grateful for what he did from 2016 to 2020. I voted for
Mm-hmm.
him in 2020. It was the first presidential election I voted in, so he's the only president I've ever voted for.
Same.
So I'm over one. But I think he's the only person who mobilizes the left like he does. I think he's the only person who has the potential to lose, despite how abysmal this Biden presidency is. Just like I think Hillary Clinton is almost the only person who could have lost to him in
Yeah.
2016. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Because he was
Yep.
such a wild card. But the right hated Hillary so much that they were like, "F it, like
Yeah.
give me Trump."
Mm-hmm.
And nobody believed like Trump in 2020 was not Trump of 2016. Like that was a
Mm-hmm.
straight up unbelievable. It was a South Park episode. You know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
couldn't believe that was
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
And so I'm afraid that he'll run again in 2024 and lose somehow, and that we would be in for some really dark days. And so I actually am of the more pessimistic mindset. I think that I'm optimistic, like through our faith, obviously, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the beauty of the 20th century that we haven't had as much in the last 30 or 40 years is there was mad saints with all these world wars and the ugliness and
Mm-hmm.
the terribleness that was happening in the world. We had a lot of saints, and we
Yeah.
haven't had as many in the last several decades. And I think that that's going to change in our lifetime, in our generation. I think we're going to have a number of saints, but I am trying to prepare myself to raise kids who are going to live in an apostolic age and not in Christendom, which I think we're moving into. And I think it's pretty objectively true that that's happening. And so I think that that's not typically like a 15-year period, that's typically like centuries long, or at least, 50 to 100 years. And so I think that we're going to be into a serious time of apostolic age, and we're going to have some serious pruning in the church that's already begun for the last 60 years. But I do hope and have optimism that like by the end of our lives, we'll start to see things turning around and changing. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a good movement in the young conservatives and things like that, pushing against the hippies and the boomers that ruined the
Yep.
church and America.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's going to take a while to turn around.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think we're in for
Sure.
a good 40 years of, especially if we lose these next, like if things don't really reverse this year in the midterms, and then if we don't win the presidency back in 24, I think we're in for some dark times. And if we don't reverse Roe v. Wade, if we do reverse Roe v. Wade, we're going to have a civil war over abortion. And if we
Yeah.
don't reverse Roe v. Wade, I am shocked that God hasn't destroyed our country yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where I feel like people, especially the conservatives that we were talking about earlier, of like this nationalism of like America's Israel,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, like the chosen country. It's like we are so horrible,
Yeah.
like America's so great and I love it, and there's a lot of great things about it. But our culture and the things that we've done in the last 100 years, and we don't just do them, we promote them throughout the world.
Yeah.
Like we talk about the
Yep.
errors of Russia spreading throughout the world. Like, dude, we're paying for abortions in other countries. We're paying for gender theory stuff happening in more
Yep.
conservative countries, Muslim countries. And it's like, how do we not just get,
Yeah.
our own personal flood here in the next 30 years?
Seriously.
So yeah, so I'm pessimistic about that. But one thing that inspires me in that is when I take all of that in and I think about it, I'm just more inspired to try to be a saint myself.
Yep.
Try to help Emily to be a saint, because I
Yep.
think that's going to be what's most needed.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I'm pessimistic about, I guess, society in general, but I'm super excited about the opportunities that I think we have that I don't think we ever had before. Like, there's a lot of things I have my own. I feel like my own callings and things that I'm like very ambitious about. And yeah, I mean, we'll see. I guess time will tell. Okay, I lied. I have one more thing. This will be a
Let's
quick
hear it.
one. It's just for those who are listening, especially the younger audience, maybe even for the young minorities out there, if there's any listening to us too. Like, what is your advice for them? I mean, just at a general level, I think, whether it be for surviving in the society or practicing their faith or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's a great one. I've been wanting to record a podcast on this because I have a ton of thoughts. And recently I had one of my cousins overdosed on drugs, and passed away about a week and a half ago. And through all of that happening and just kind of like re-entering with that side is on my black side of my family. And just seeing my black family and just kind of the state of affairs, the state of the union that is my black family, the Crankfield family, it's depressing. There's no way around it. And I've been trying to think, for so long of like, what would I say to my younger cousins, to my nieces and nephews, to try to get them to stop the cycle, to stop this cycle of, it's not even mediocrity, it's below that, right? Below average living and settling. And one thing I was thinking about today as I was driving home from the gym, actually, so maybe that was for this podcast, was that we accept and approve of everything, which is why we have nothing, I think. My family I'm talking about. I also just had a cousin come out as gay, or he's a nephew technically, but he's older than me because my family's all kinds of wild. But he just came out as gay, and I was watching everybody kind of praise him, and I'm like, I could almost understand it more if he was like mentally, emotionally, spiritually sound, and he was like, this is who I am, But I'm like, if there's anybody in my life who I've ever met, legit, like not exaggerating, who would be, we talk about nature versus nurture when it comes to homosexuality, and I think that it's a balance of both, and there's cases of both. If there's ever an example in my life of somebody who might be nurture into that, and I'm not talking about like he was raised to be gay, because we had a very like kind of conservative, typical like black, like be a man, like don't be gay, like back when like gayness was frowned upon, right? But it never met his father. Is all types of drugged out at this point. Like you could look and see my man and see he is not doing well mental health wise, emotionally, in between jobs. He's been an atheist since we were 10 years old. I'm like, nothing about him is like, oh, I'm doing well and this is just a part of who I am, right? Like, so I'm like, this is depressing, and everybody's celebrating it like it's this good thing. And so all this to build up to, if anybody's out there who's listening to this, that you look around at your family and you're like, man, this is so broken, this is such a mess, which I think is true for white people and black people alike. But I think as black Catholics, especially, or minority Catholics, thinking about, you might even be looking at, wow, my whole family is liberal, my whole family's pro-choice or pro same-sex marriage or whatever it might be, or not practicing their faith. It's just to be willing to do the work to be different, right? And I had to move away. I had to do a lot of things. Ranger school was not fun. I remember laying there, on these cold nights in the mountains, being snowed and rained on. And but I wanted to learn how to become a man. I went to college to do that. I've read hundreds of books, since I turned 18, trying to learn and understand and seeking out mentors and guidance. But really, I think what's needed more than anything, and I've been writing about this a lot recently for a different book that I'm trying to write, is just you just need to kind of like Men in Black when they had that kind of memory, they got the memory joint, the stick, and it's like you need to just like wipe it clean. Like you can't forget your memories, but like what you think life is, what you think excellence is, what you think your standard of living is, you just need to completely blank it out and actually go out and seek the truth and seek what is excellence. What do I want to be my standard for my life? Because it's not worth repeating the cycle, and it's difficult and it's painful and it's hard to be pruned. It's hard to be changed. It's hard to submit your life to Christ and to actually allow him to make you into somebody. But man, I look at what my family has and what I could have been and what I could have done. And I'm like, I'm so glad that I'm getting married to Emily Harpole in the church in 2 weeks. And I have this wonderful job and this wonderful home and this amazing dog and this amazing ministry that I get to do, and the nice car I get to drive. And it's not just about the material things, but also that I have this virtue, that I have this commitment to the truth, that I have the courage to commit to one woman for the rest of my life and to not use birth control and to have waited for marriage and all these other things, right? It's like that's so much better than what I see in the rest of my family. And it's so hard because they have this mentality, oh, you think you're better than us. And it's like, no, I don't think that I have more value than you, but I'm very glad that I'm living my life and I'm not living yours. And I think if you could choose between yours and mine, you'd choose mine too. There is a better way. And that's something that I think a lot of minority communities in general, but minority Catholics get into this Like, you can't, who am I to judge? And it's like, no, dog, you need to start judging, because there's a better way to live and you might not be living it right now. And that's a hard reality to face. That's a hard truth to accept. But when you do accept it, that's what opens you up to the possibility of changing your life. And when you can accept responsibility for, wow, I'm not living right. And maybe it's not just my dad's fault or my mom's fault or my brother's fault. Maybe it's my fault. I accept responsibility for getting myself into this mess. Then you actually have the power to change it and get yourself out. So I think the biggest thing is realizing that there is a better way of living, probably than how you're currently living, and accepting responsibility for changing your own life and allowing God to be the driving force behind that.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, dude. That is beautifully said. It reminds me, in a real condensed version, like literally one of the worst teachers I've ever had literally had probably one of the best advice I've ever heard, and it was like super simple. Wow. And it was like, I didn't learn anything from him. That's why I call him one of the worst teachers. It was, a good guy, I'm sure, and things like that. But I remember at like our last day of school, this is like sophomore year of high school, and it's this AP Euro class. And he was like, if I had to tell, like, if you guys get anything from this class, he's like, I would just say question everything. And I was like, at first I was thinking about it, I was like, dude, classic lib, right? Like, of course he's telling me to question everything right. And like in like the classic morals of society. But then I was like, it stuck with me ever since then. I'm like, no, but you do, like, if you don't question why you believe something, you'll never understand truly why, and you'll never have the conviction to fight for it. So it was like, yeah, dude, that stuck with me forever. It's at least to this day. And I think it always will. It was just so fascinating the way it was, like kind of dramatic the way he did it, like a movie ending, but it was like super sick at the same time. But anyways, I just want to thank you, dude, for coming on. I thought it was, I knew it was going to be good, but I had even more fun than I anticipated. I thought it was awesome. I hope to definitely bring you back sometime, and we could dive into more things. I think there's so much more to talk about that we could do. And also I'm praying for you for this marriage. Hope that the wedding days is as amazing as everyone else is always as mine was, as you hope it to be. I'm praying that you know what I mean, just are, I know you're look like a great man, at least from my perspective, and I hope that continues into your marriage and everything like that. And yeah, dude, let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we'll have to get you on the Seeking Excellence podcast as well. We'll have a good time. This was great. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blessing, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys stay through the whole video, let us know if you like it. If you want to bring Nathan back on, I'm probably going to regardless, even if you don't say anything. So I'll just take that as a yes. But until the next time, guys, peace out. Have yourself a good one.